My name is Jason Reynolds, and I am the author of Long Way Down. I'm from right here in Washington, D.C., and it's interesting because I was a kid who unfortunately didn't read many books because I didn't find books that directly connected to my life. And so it was through rap music and the discovery of sort of rap lyrics that I found my path and my way into the world of poetry, and that poetry evolved over the course of 10, 15 years into a way for me to tell my own stories. And from there, my life sort of changed. Therefore, it's no surprise that Long Way Down, this book that means so much to me, is written in verse. I wrote Long Way Down for a few reasons. I think that right now, nationally, we're having a conversation around gun violence in many different ways. I think it's a multi-tiered, polythic discussion that we've been having, and it's a good discussion, but it's complex and it's complicated and it's tense and contentious. But I also think there's an element to this discussion that we haven't quite tapped into just yet. I think when you talk about young people and what's happening with young people all over America, specifically in lower income and under-resourced communities, and the trading of bullets back and forth, and the body counts and the death tolls and all these things that we like to discuss, what often happens is we like to wipe them with this broad brush and say that these young kids are killers and gangsters and criminals and thugs, and all these labels that we strap on them so that it makes it easier for us to not see them as children. And so what Long Way Down is meant to do is not just to engage in a discussion of putting guns down, it's also meant to ask the really difficult questions, which is to young people, why are you so upset? Why do you feel so insignificant? What kind of pain are you in? What trauma have you experienced? What's your background? What's your family traditions? How long has this trauma existed in your life? Who have you lost? Who's been taken from you? How does poverty, education, and politics, all those things weigh into this story? You didn't just get here by picking up a gun because you are a criminal. You are a child, and I can't be mad at you for not knowing how to deal with things that I never taught you to deal with. And that's what Long Way Down is truly, truly meant to get at. To describe the story Long Way Down, I mean, in a one-liner, it would be Boys in the Hood meets A Christmas Carol. But to sort of expand that and to explode it out a bit, it's simply a story about a young man named Will who loses his brother to gun violence. And Will has to make a really difficult decision because he comes from a community. Like so many of us come from communities where there are codes, there are rules and ecosystems that must be followed. And so he has to figure out and to choose whether or not he's going to follow the rules. And one of those rules is, unfortunately, to avenge his brother's death. He gets on an elevator, and the entire story takes place in 67 seconds on that elevator as he goes from his floor down to the ground floor to then meet the crossroads of whether he goes right or left, whether he follows those rules or makes new rules for himself. The former Long Way Down is just as important to the story as the story itself. Long Way Down originally was written in prose, and it's really difficult to convince any reader that a 300-page book written in 80,000, 85,000 words takes place in 67 seconds. Right? In order for me to make the book feel believable, it needed to move at a certain clip. There needed to be urgency, even in the pace in which the pages turned. And so I wrote the book in verse because that's what I needed. I needed it to be sort of like flip, 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 instead of it being like, let me read and read and read and read, and 5 minutes later, I'll finally turn the page, and that's supposed to take up 0.01 seconds of a kid's life, right? It's really difficult to sort of pull that off. The other thing, though, is that anybody who's been through trauma knows that the brain is not working in complete sentences. It's working in words, it's working in codes, right? Snapshots, right? Synapses firing off, right? That's what it feels like. It isn't this, the brain isn't sort of weaving these beautiful, flowery sentences in the midst of terrible, terrible emotional pain and psychosis. And so I wanted to figure out how to put the brain on the page, put a traumatized psyche on the page, and it was easier for me to do so using verse. And then lastly, I wanted to play around subconsciously with the minds of the reader. There are fascinating things you can do when you use the page as a canvas. And verse allows you to do so. It's no different than Hitchcock, right? When Hitchcock was sort of filming movies, he would tilt the camera slightly just so that the frame was diagonal. Even if there's nothing actually intense happening in the scene, to the viewer, it's really uncomfortable just because of that slight tilt. I used space on the page to do the same thing. How can I stretch the words out and move them around to cause tension and discomfort and dissonance in the reader so that they can then live on that elevator with this character? I think that the things that I would really love readers to think about, number one, is decision making. If you are a child, right? If you are a young reader, I want you to think about decision making. If you are an older reader, I want you to think about how difficult it is for young readers and young people to make certain decisions. That there are lots of things happening that we don't know and that we don't see. The other thing, though, is that I want us all to think about the idea of being haunted. And I think that when we say haunted, we always think about ghosts. We always think about anything that is sort of ephemeral or abstract or that is sort of undead, and all these sort of ways that we think about the idea of being haunted. But the truth is, all of us are haunted by something, whether it be haunted by your parents' teachings, haunted by your spiritual practices, haunted by your education, haunted by the bad things, the good things, former loves, right? We all are being haunted and followed around. Everything sticks to us. And I want to sort of really nail that down, because if you are an adult and you are working with young people, it is incumbent upon you to know that everything is going to stick. Everything, every negative thing you say, every positive thing you say, whether you think it's sticking or not, is of no consequence. It is sticking, and you have to know that. And for young people, when you look at your circle, when you look at your friends, when you look at your communities, when you look at your families, remember, it's all sticking. Right? So we have to make choices in order to figure out what can we peel off the best we can and what can we allow to stay. And those are the things that I really, really want people to think really deeply about. Writing is rough. Writing is hard. I mean, look, I like to believe that, I say all the time that writing is difficult, and I think people feel like because writing is difficult, I don't like it. And that's not the case. Writing is difficult, and that's why I like it. I believe that you ask a marathon runner why they like to run, and I think it's the euphoric feeling of accomplishing something that felt impossible. A challenge is what I do it for. It's like living in the boot camp, right? And I'm one of my mentors said that to write a novel is to climb Mount Everest, and you don't always know that you can make it to the top, to the summit of Mount Everest, and then you get there and you look out amongst the horizon and you say, I can't believe I climbed Mount Everest. Now I know I can climb Mount Everest. And then you walk all the way back down to the base of the mountain and you say, now I'm going to climb it again. But what you did not know was that all the footholds changed. And that is what it feels like to be a writer. Every mountain is a new mountain, even if you've climbed the mountain before. And I'm grateful for that, because not everybody can do it, right? It's what makes it special, that it's hard, that it's difficult. And when it works, right? When it works, it's magic. With the sort of strange, for me, influx of theatrical adaptations, I mean, first of all, it's super humbling, right? I mean, I'm honored. And honestly, I don't exactly know why it's happening. I don't know why this is the case at the moment. I mean, I've written a lot of books, and over the past couple of years, things have sort of picked up in terms of the adaptations. What I do know, though, is I believe that theater is interesting in terms of whatever is put on the stage has to have an immediate sort of impact on the audience, because this is a live, right? Everybody's engaged in this conversation. If you are here in the audience, you are actually a part of this. Whether you speak or not, whether I speak directly to you, whether we break the fourth wall or not, doesn't really matter. You are in relationship with the piece of art in this space. It's no different than you going to a museum and looking at a Rothko, looking at a Motherwell, right? It's like you're standing in front of it and you are in conversation with it. It is not speaking back to you, except for it is, right? It is, and you're having this sort of dialogue. And so what I find most interesting and most incredible is that for some reason, and this is when I talk about intuition, because I don't have the answer about why this is happening, but for some reason, the works that I've written over the last few years seem to be primed for this conversation, right? Primed for the adaptation to engage in that discussion with audience, right? That you can say, hey, when you read this book, you're in discussion, you're in conversation with the characters and with the piece of art, and we're gonna put this on stage, and you still are gonna have a different version of that same conversation, and it may touch or tap into something that you couldn't quite see in the book. It's no different than Shakespeare. I am not Shakespeare, obviously, but it's no different than Shakespeare. We read Shakespeare and we parse it line for line. What does he mean here? What does the word will mean, right? Will means 4 different things, 5 different things when Shakespeare is writing it, right? Oh, what does this mean? What does that mean? What does he mean by this? What does he mean by that? And then, after you've had that entire dialogue on the page, you see it on a stage, and then rehash that conversation in a very different way with a very different tone. It's a special, special thing that not all of us have been able to do. I don't know why it's happening, but I'm so, so grateful. And it reaffirms and confirms and reassures me to just continue to trust my gut. The human part of me will always connect to the human part of everybody else. So I have to be in tune with whatever that is. In terms of the intergenerational audience, that excites me because that always excites me. I think every single space should sort of involve intergenerational audiences, because I think that human beings exist on a continuum, right? Like what these young people are dealing with, we like to pretend this is a new phenomenon, but the truth of the matter is that it may be a different version of a phenomenon that has been happening for a very long time. If there are any adults in the room who have 14-year-old children, there's a good chance that they were born and raised, or at least raised in the 1980s. Therefore, this story should feel very familiar to them if they grew up in the city in the 1980s, right? And if you're coming up in the 60s, it may not look the same, but there are still similarities in terms of why do we feel helpless and hopeless? Why do we feel like in order to exert a certain level of what it means to be man, what it means to be male, we have to take up arms, we have to be emotionless? These are all questions that are not new questions, right? We're talking about generations of these rules and some variation. And I'm excited to see multi-generational audiences have that discussion and witness this at the same time to see who has what reaction. For the adults in the room to figure out the fate of a child, and when they figure that out, to ask themselves why they feel the way they feel. And for young kids in the room to look at that and say, here are the things that I would do, or this reminds me of my friend who's been through this, or my older brother who's been through this. What a beautiful experience for us all.